Well, I thought I had a good handle on what the main Doom clones were, but after watching this video, which we're going to include as a link to this show, um, my knowledge was far more shallow than I thought. Dr. Mike and I had a chance to kind of watch a video a gentleman put together that covers very extensively the world of Doom clones, the really good ones, the really not so good ones, and some treasures that I had zero awareness of until I watched this video, and ones I'm definitely interested in hearing what Mike's got to say about. So this is a great video covering Doom clones. Um, were you as surprised as I was, or you're a little more steeped in video game lore than I, so maybe none of these were a surprise to you, but there were several jaw droppers for me.
So, a friend that I mentioned in a recent episode who would sometimes, pop over and accidentally install games onto my DOS on my gateway Windows computer. Um, he had given me Wolfenstein 3D, which I believe was shareware, so it's okay. So he given me Wolfenstein 3D, maybe the expansion pack as well. From there, he and I both got obsessed with that game and just the idea of first person shooters. And that wasn't the first person shooter, but they didn't look like that prior to that. They didn't play that well. They weren't that smooth. A lot of them were like wireframe or very almost static images that would move like one frame at a time to move you forward in a space, like dungeon crawler style stuff. They did not move like Wolfenstein seemed like. Now, of course, it seems very quaint, but it seemed like insanely fast paced and fluid compared to what had come before it. So immediately we're like, we need to find more games like this. And there was a ton of games in the wake of Wolfenstein, even before you get to Doom, because id, who developed that for Apogee, um, were letting people use that engine to make other first person shooters. So there was just a flood of them, including Supernova's Arc 3D, just a flood of first person shooters. And for the most part, we played as many of them as we get our hands on. A lot of really cool games along the way, but a lot of terrible games too. It's very similar to, I always try to explain to people, like, I'm a huge horror movie fan. So I watch a lot of stuff, sometimes just because it's a new horror movie and I just want to check it out. What's cool about that is sometimes you find these great hidden gem things that you can then share with your friends, and it's really cool. But you also watch a lot of garbage when you approach things that way. And that kind of became our thing with first person shooters. So Wolfenstein was kind of our way into it, and then when Doom hit, Doom was just life changing for us at that. It was the perfect time. Like, we were just really getting into first person shooters. Doom seemed so much more advanced and so much more edgy and mature, and we were the perfect age for edgy to work on us better than any other age. Probably completely sell us on that. Luckily, the game was awesome, and I still play it to this day. And you can play it on, your lawnmower or anything that has electricity to it. You can play Doom. But yeah, we got really heavily into kind of these Wolfenstein and Doom clone games, and some were great, and some are like ones they mentioned on here.
Yeah, one of the ones. So were you familiar with PO'd?
You said you're not familiar with
I
PO'd?
said, were you familiar with PO'd?
Oh yeah,
Okay, I was not. So
yeah.
any game featuring butt enemies that fart at you,
That you
thumbs
beat
up.
with a frying pan.
Yeah, and I think available on 3DO if I'm not mistaken.
Originally, I believe it was a 3DO exclusive initially when it was released, but a lot of it, like a lot of 3DO exclusives, eventually made its way onto PlayStation, which is where I originally played it. Because I didn't have a 3DO, I didn't know anybody who had a 3DO. That was the only system I think that one friend didn't get was a 3DO because it was $1 million at the time. Um, so I didn't get to play that until it got ported to PlayStation. It, I guess, looked like marginally better on PlayStation, but it is a ugly game. Like, it is hard on the eyes. It is think Gloom, but more simplistic. The sprites. and a couple generations down the line. So it absolutely shouldn't look like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's running on 3DO, which in theory,
Right.
you
It
should
is going
have.
to be, yeah, much more so than Gloom, which was an indie floppy disk game for Amiga, as opposed to this being a 3DO exclusive title. So I have not played the 3DO version. I did get a ROM of it totally legally by somebody who had it as a backup copy that they offered to me. So I do have the ROM of it. I am going to play it, but I remember it being a bad experience on the PlayStation. And I remember people telling me that that was slightly better than the original version.
Won't be surprised. And we'll, there's a previous episode of our show where we discuss setting up your own 3DO emulation. So you may want to check that out so that you can check out this gem if you haven't run across it before. But I'm going to add that to my 3DO set of ROMs because I just first passed through, missed that. So that'll be good. The other one that really jumped out at me and kind of that same thing of, wow. And we've talked in the past four about interesting marketing executions that folks have done. And Mr. Pibb was another one that I was unaware. But Mr. Pibb is a Doom clone where you're in a high school or a school, and all your teachers and friends have been turned into not particularly scary looking zombies. And it's very cartoony, but you basically go in there and continue to drink Mr. Pibb so that you can belch at them. And that's what converts them back to normal people. So I thought um, an interesting turn in the kind of Doom-esque platform. But
Yeah, I was not aware of the Mr. Pip game before this, which I to me this was the highlight of the video because that's one that I had no idea existed. And we have talked a little bit on this about these marketing related kind of moves with video games, and we even did an episode, and we have to do a proper review, a proper Panda review, but we did do an episode where we talked about Yo Noid
yep,
on here. So we still have to do a proper Panda review, but I actually really like Yonoid. And some of the other games like that, while yeah, they're just to sell a product, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be bad games though. However, this game I'm particularly interested in because can you imagine going to a meeting now and they're like, "Hey, why don't we make like a mini game that we can sell our product based on?" Sounds like a great idea. What's it going to be? A first person shooter in a school.
yeah, yeah. It's going to be a little harder sell, I think. Um, there was the Kennedy assassination role play game out a little while ago, and that didn't work out either. So this wouldn't do so well either. So yeah, that'll be a wash. And that there are kind of the same kind of as things have evolved in our society. Um, all the I built a Doom level of where I was working at the time, and not as part of a planning process, but I thought it'd be kind of cool to say, yeah, this is good. I got the hallway conference rooms there, this is there, and all that kind of stuff.
It's where my
Uh,
boss is.
this is the boss is there. Um, that not good. Doesn't age well. So those are
Here's Dave, the dickhead who didn't refill the coffee.
that's right. Oh, look, there's a whole set of ammo of rockets right by Dave. Wonder what can happen next. So, yeah. Yeah, no, I just populated the thing as much as possible with imps and things like that. Just but yeah, some of those things don't translate really well. But it's great. I mean, highly recommend. We're including the link to the video in the description to check it out because he goes through really extensively on some things, and a lot of the stuff he said I agreed with. Some of it I feel a little bit differently, but as he pulled out a couple that he was big fans of, and Hexen and Heretic were up there. Those are good games. I have not played those in a while. Um, I don't think, I mean, you can refresh me if I'm wrong here. I don't think Quake or Unreal got a lot of love in. I don't think he got they got mentioned, but that may also be because they seem like they're next almost next generation. But really, Quake's a Doom clone. I mean, depending on how you want to define what a Doom clone is,
Right. So
Quake, and
I
it's by
think, yeah,
id.
he doesn't really talk. I think he brushes over Quake quickly just because of the id Software thing.
Yeah,
But I could see drawing a line there because the difference is between these games and Quake is actually a 3D game. So
that's true.
Doom and Wolfenstein in these games aren't actually 3D, they're 2D. They're just simulating a 3D environment
That's fair.
by redrawing the image that you're seeing. Whereas Quake has actual 3D polygons and stuff in it in a 3D environment. That was the start of that, and then Unreal taking that further. And so I feel like that is a good place to draw the line on there. I don't, and I've heard people use this term before. This isn't the first time I heard it, but boomer shooters. People refer to those as the
Yep.
2D fake 3D shooting games. And I get it. Like I do feel like it makes sense to make a distinction from that era to making the jump to actual 3D polygon based games. I don't like boomer shooter though, because I grew up with these games and I'm not a boomer. And normally I don't care about that stuff. I don't even know what generation I would be considered part of because it doesn't matter. But boomers do sometimes need to be singled out. And I'm not a part of that generation. So we need to come up with something different. But I do agree with kind of segregating this particular thing of these 2D first person shooters.
Yeah, and uh, I'm just not on Mike's side on singling out boomers, so it happens to be some of those folks watching. As usual, Mike's doing everything he can to endear himself to the audience. So keep up the good work. Appreciate that.
Now, was there any other games that he mentioned that you are a fan of? You had mentioned, Hexen and Heretic.
But yeah, which I had back so Doom saturated, doing a ton of Doom stuff. Doom 2, Hexen or Heretic comes out, and it was like, oh, this is kind of a cool little twist on things. So big fans of those. We've just recently talked about Gloom, so it's good for it to get a mention, and it kind of tracks in terms of it's great. It's really fun gameplay that's hard to see unless
Yeah.
you can get to the Gloom Deluxe version on all of that because it's just struggling with resolution a little bit. The double pixel stuff's kind of painful on that. Alien Breed got a shout out as well, and so those are good. Those were really good ones that I do. And I kind of the whole Hexen heretic thing. I think would be a lot where I'd center on to say one of the kind of top ones. How about you?
I did play Heretic, which I kind of forgotten. Like I remembered that it existed, and I recently got Hexen for Nintendo 64, so I've been playing that. Super fun. I did not play Hexen when it originally came out, and from my understanding, the Nintendo 64 one is the same core game as the floppy disk version of Hexen, except that it has a new score. So different score, but otherwise the same core game. There's a CD-ROM version of it, from what I've read, which has cutscenes. That is not what was ported over for the Nintendo 64, which makes sense. Being on a cartridge, there's memory issues. Um, Having a lot of fun with Hexen, but I had completely kind of forgotten about Heretic. I remembered it existed, but not until I was looking at the gameplay footage of it do I really remember playing it. And while I didn't play it anywhere near as much as Doom or Wolfenstein 3D, I did have the shareware version of Heretic, and I did play that quite a bit. The one that he mentioned, though, that I by far played the most after Wolfenstein and Doom would be Rise of the Triad. And Rise of the Triad, I don't agree with it being on here because it actually started as a sequel to Wolfenstein 3D. It's from the same people, not id Software, but it's from Apogee, who is the publisher and one of the guys who had worked on the game. They started it as a standalone sequel while id was working on Doom, and decided that they had added so much to it that it didn't feel like a sequel to Wolfenstein anymore. It felt like its own game. So they just changed the name and released it as its own game. And that game has a pretty big cult following. It's been re released a couple times. There was a remake of it There was expansion packs, the usual stuff you got for that stuff. There was a remake of it a few years ago, and they just recently put out a remastered version of it, which I haven't played yet. But I have the remake and the original, both through Steam, so I'll probably end up grabbing the remastered at some point. But if you haven't played that, it's one that I highly recommend. It's more so it's going to look closer to Doom because it's a lot darker and more violent, but it actually plays more like Wolfenstein but with platforming. And
Okay.
because you couldn't jump or anything in it, so it's this complex series of platforms that you kind of have to run and dive off of to get to different points. There's also a lot of movement in the walls and different things, which kind of remind you of Gloom.
Oh, cool. I'll check that
Yeah, so
out.
I would say it's a cross between Wolfenstein 3D and Gloom, but with way better graphics than both of those.
Yeah, and I think one for me that kind of falls in that same category that I like and it was interesting and I see some connection, but I'm not sure it makes the cut as a 2D simulating 3D environment thing was Dark Forces.
Yeah,
If
so
you get
I'm glad you brought that one up too, because I remember that being released, but I never played that, and that just got uh, dropped onto Steam,
yeah,
the
yeah,
remastered.
remastered on that.
Yeah,
It's fun. So basically, it's a Doom like experience, but you've now mapped the Star Wars universe and over the over all that, and you've got to basically deal with stormtroopers and Imperial troopers and all that kind of stuff there. A good gameplay. It's fun. I recommend it. I think it's really good. What I'm a huge fan of is Dark Forces 2, uh, which became also kind of the Jedi Knight series. And there are multiple ones. Dark Forces 2, uh, best I can tell, PC only, that there weren't console ports for it. But Dark Forces 2 is really, really fun. And so I'm gonna have to check. I'm sure that's available on Steam. So that's I'm gonna have to go back and do it. Has some of the best cheat codes ever. Because you can kind of drop in your invincibility if you want to do that, and then a fly one so that you can at some point travel on the XY axis through there if you want to. But if it's like, oh, how am I going to get up to that window? It's like, oh, I'll just fly. And you can get up and do some things there, or just raise yourself out of the melee if you need to on that. So the cheat codes allowed you to, if you weren't going to want to work too hard and still enjoy the game. Couple interesting weird Easter eggs in it as well. But yeah, but I highly recommend the first. So Dark Force is the original one. It's just kind of fun because it is. What if Doom was based on Star Wars kind of thing, and it's visually really nice and fun, good ambiance to it. So yeah, I'd recommend that. But from a gameplay perspective, if you happen to be on the Steam store, you may want to take a look at Dark Forces 2.
yeah, I'll have to check it out. I do remember that being released, but I don't remember what me and my friends were into at the time. But we were so entrenched in, Doom, or probably at that time would have been like Duke Nukem
Yep.
that we would have been really into. So I think we are too entrenched in that at the moment to really get into it. But it is a game I was aware of and always wanted to play.
Yeah, I mean, Duke Nukem was a great way to introduce teens to the concept of giving strippers money and stuff like that. So
Right. Yeah.
broke a lot of ground. It was a good educational video in a lot of ways. So fun and fun for you to watch and learn.
And if you have a Evercade, Duke Nukem games have been remastered into two collections on there, the first three games, as well as the PlayStation games.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you can't get the super cool uh, Duke Nukem branded stuff anymore. But that was cool. Yeah, yeah, Duke Nukem was another one mentioned in this, and obviously we've talked about it before. It's fun, another really enjoyable one there. So, um, like to hear from you. What we'd really like is for you folks to subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Hit that bell to know when new stuff goes out. We've got merchandise. You'll see a link for that in the description, and be sure and check that Hard No playlist out. The world's shortest podcast. You found it if you subscribe to the Bug Panda channel. It's there. the world's shortest podcast, Hard No. So you should check that out as well.
And you know what? While you guys are at it, you might as well hit up the merch store. Anybody can buy t-shirts on there, even boomers.
Bog Panda.